Hello, it's me. I am live. Oh, my other computer was playing my audio back at me. That was awkward. So, hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Applied Digital Studies. I am your professor, Zach Whalen, and today we're going to be talking about usability and interactivity design, designing for interactivity, something like that. So, I have some things prepared for you, and I want to explain them. Also, update you on some things with the class, and yeah, just kind of see how things are going. So before I get started, here's something. I mean, you can look at that now, but or it's over that way, that way. But before I get started, I had the screen you were seeing as I was my countdown screen as you were seeing it had the animated GIF of the flag there. That was to remind me, to remind you that tomorrow is election day, and I can't imagine that you don't know that. I can't imagine that you don't already have a plan to vote, or maybe you've decided not to vote, which is, you're right. But hopefully you've got a plan or you've already voted, and so please do that. Please don't forget. It's not like, you haven't heard much about this lately. Yeah, me too. I voted a while ago. So hopefully you've already done that, or likewise, got a plan. I don't have a class to cancel tomorrow, so I haven't canceled class, but I guess I would have, or come up with some alternative programming of some sort to encourage you to vote. I guess if for some reason your day comes down to either voting or doing something for my class, make sure you vote instead of doing something for my class. That's, yeah, good to hear that, Ginger Snaps. Yeah, thank you for being out there doing what you need to tomorrow. Yeah, should be interesting. Should be interesting to see what happens tomorrow. But anyway, don't forget, and yeah, good luck, I guess. I don't know. Good luck to whoever's voting. Today, yeah, we're going to talk about something new. This is sort of random, but I thought I'd share. I shared this in Discord already, but I was fairly proud of my my trickery eating setup, so I wanted to show it to you again to make sure that you saw it, because I was pretty proud of it. So this was this is my working draft, or this is what I accomplished like a couple weekends ago, and then it was kind of working. I had some bungee cords, you can kind of see them in the background. It turned out to be pretty tricky to combine. The primary power comes from the rope torsion. You can kind of see it down here. It's twisting, and then the untwist, its desired untwist itself, is what swings the arm up. It turns out that's a nice clean release of power. Whereas the bungee cord, it has a very steep power differential. I don't know what the right term would be, but it's really hard to get them working together. I think a purely bungee powered catapult or as I found out, a purely rope powered catapult works better. Combining the two is really tricky. So I went with the rope, and I was speculating about different things I could try. Then I realized my launcher arm doesn't seem that bulky to me, but what happens if what if I change that? So I went with this setup, and so it's the same frame, but I added a pull noodle here on the crossbar so it wouldn't crack the pipe or as it was coming up. It also creates kind of like a silencer, so it's a bit of a surprise when it launches. And this worked pretty well, but the PVC you can see is bending, but it was still good enough as a demo to confirm that I got a lot farther. I got a much greater range by increasing the length of the launcher arm. So I did try. I don't have a shot of it, but I did try. I increased it by a lot. This is probably 6 feet right here, maybe 5. And as an experiment, I combined 2 broom handles, and so I made a launcher arm that was 12 feet, and it was too slow. I couldn't bring it up fast enough to launch. So it didn't work out, but the 5 or 6 foot range seemed ideal. So let's see. You can see this is the final form, and I can't make that any bigger, I don't think, but you can kind of see here. It's a broom handle. I've got it padded with a foam noodle, and then I used a dustpan bolted to the top of it as the launcher arm. Then I got this key system as the trigger, and so I pull the trigger. This is a dry fire, just to demo it. But I was pretty proud of that key system. So it's just a nail through a dowel on a string, and then the nail goes across their, I guess it's a pipe clamp, and so it's got 2 holes, sort of like this, and then you just pull like that, and then it just launches. So very nice. I mean, a very clean release. I was very happy with that. So here's my full setup. I had a target drawn on the driveway where kids were supposed to stand and try to catch it, and a few caught it. Out of 60 missiles that I launched, I would say 3 caught them or less. One, the dad caught it, so that kind of doesn't count. But yeah, I got a good arc with it. Like, that distance is about 30 feet from launch to target, and some of them overshot, some undershot, but most were right near the target. And but it's a good arc, so you had a good like 2 or 3 seconds of hang time to try to catch it, about 25 feet up. So I was pretty happy with that overall. And yeah, I mean, the kids seemed to enjoy it that came by. I mean, the one thing that I think those kids may have discovered later is that some candy holds up better than others. And so, after launching that far, even Skittles, which I view as fairly tough, they kind of broke down a little bit too. That said, the Skittles that I noticed that about, I had launched them probably 30 times in testing, and so they had undergone a lot more abuse than normal. But I think some M&Ms probably shattered. Kit Kats absolutely just turned into dust. But in the bag, I put them in bags so it wouldn't be a mess. And Starburst did fine. Milky Way did fine. I think Almond Joy did fine, but I didn't actually test any of those. Like, I didn't open them later to see how they felt fine in the package. So overall, I think small candy bars are probably better. Also, if I had spread them out a little bit more, I could have kept going. I had to wrap up around 7:30. I ran out around 7:30, where I think kids were out still until 8 or so. So next year, maybe I'll do 80 to 100, but I'll definitely do the catapult again because I think it was fun and kids seem to enjoy it. And it's still, I have it. It's still here. I'm not going to throw it away. So, and also it could come in handy. Who knows when it would be convenient to have a catapult, right? It's a good thing to have. So that was my Halloween experience. Speaking of Halloween, I hope you all enjoyed the ghost stories on Friday. I had fun looking at some of that stuff. It was pretty spooky. Hopefully you didn't get too spooked out by it. But there's some good stuff out there on the internet, pretty entertaining. So yeah, it's good. So here's what's going on. As you recall from last, week, we did I sent out a survey to see what topics you were interested in. And the winner was interactive design. So I have come up with some things to think about with interactive design. I'm going to start that today and then continue that Wednesday. And then this one I'm looking at right here, this is the thing that I'd like for you to turn in. And I hope you will see that this is pretty minimal, but I think useful. So this is something I am asking you to do, but it will help all of your projects, I think. Some more than others maybe, but I think it should be pretty useful. This is going to help us understand usability as a principle that we are striving for whenever we create anything, whenever we design anything, whenever we want people to use something. And use can be an umbrella term. Use could mean read, watch, play. It could all kinds of different things. So whatever you're creating for your DGST big project, listen would be another verb. Use encompasses that. You do want people to use your product, your project, and in that sense, we want to think about this term usability. Usability is a term that defines how well people can do the thing that you're asking them to do in order to experience your ideas. And there is a study of this. There's a discipline of this. Jacob Nielsen is probably the guru in this area, and he's been publishing work in this area for many years. So what I want to do today is take you through some of his key principles and try them out a little bit. And then your homework, this is due Friday, your homework is to do a little worksheet in trying out his ideas on some artifact. Try to analyze some artifact in terms of its usability using Jacob Nielsen's principles. So I'll show you those principles today, introduce you to them. And I'm also going to help you think about a different way of thinking through design, because I think it's also worth mentioning that some of the things you might be designing have a different sense of use or design, and simplicity, transparency, things that would normally be good things in design might be things you actually want to manipulate a little bit. And hopefully I'll show you what I mean. But I'm thinking about fiction. I'm thinking about storytelling, where part of the key of good storytelling is not saying everything at once, right? Like keeping the user on the edge of their seat so they wait to hear what's coming. So some of that runs against some of the principles of usability, because usability is all about transparency and everything is where it needs to be. And yet sometimes in fiction or storytelling, even like narrative film, sometimes you're holding back and not letting the user see, or you're actually your goal is to confuse the reader a little bit. And that's something to be very careful with. It's something that someone can do with skill, and if it's done with skill, it can be very effective. But I think it's helpful to notice how it's a deviation from the norm of usability, and that might help. If you're thinking of something like that, it might help you balance out when that might be a good choice versus when it might be too much. Okay, so we're going to try it out. So let's take a look at these. This is the worksheet. Go ahead and make a copy of this. I've not made it editable. I've made it but it should be copyable. So just make a copy of this. You can do it now or later. It's not urgent. And then you're going to be filling this in. But you don't need to look at it yet because I haven't explained what these things are yet. But that's the doc. That's what's linked in the assignment page. Okay, so these are the principles, Jacob Nielsen, and it's written here. And so I'll read through these and talk about each of them in turn. But the thing first I wanted you to notice is that this is by Jacob Nielsen. This was published April 24th, 1994. So this is quite an old document in terms of the web and the internet, and that I think speaks to its value, the fact that it is still relevant, like it's still like featured on the website of the design consultancy firm that Jacob Nielsen works for, and I think he founded. So this is still relevant, even though, yeah, 26 years old now. So it's worth paying attention to, I think. I just pulled up my preview of myself. I noticed I feel really like gray and washed out, and I don't really know. I can't seem to do anything about that. I was messing around with my camera options before class, and like something's glitching between OBS and my camera. Like if I make any adjustment, it crashes. But then when I restart it, the adjustment has been applied. So like I can test things, but very slowly, basically. Like, and I notice my hair is kind of like slightly translucent, which isn't really, I don't think. It's just this thing anyway. And I don't know. Sometimes this camera works fine, and sometimes it doesn't. And I haven't really changed anything about it. I just plug it in. Anyway. These are the 10 principles, and I'm going to read through these quickly, just all at once, and then kind of go back through them and talk about them each in turn. What I love about this website, by the way, is, and it's linked from the Node for information. This is like for many of these, there's a longer article about that specific heuristic, and also there's a video explaining I think most of them, if not all of them. So yeah, all of them have videos and further documentation. So that's great. So it's all here on this website. Let me just go ahead and put this in the Discord so you have this in case you'd like to check it out. Here's the 10 principles by Jacob Nielsen. So this is what I'm working through in case you want to look through it on your own. By the way, like I'm using the term principles. This is labeled here. The title of this document is 10 usability heuristics. Heuristics is just in this case, a fancy word that just means a way of doing something, a way of like learning something. And so, but these are principles that you apply in order to, as it says here, these are broad rules of thumb and not specific usability guidelines. So these are just things to shoot for in a general sense. It's a quick shorthand definition of something that gets you something better. Like it helps you improve what you're doing in these very general terms. So that's why it's called a heuristic. A principle might be too strong of a word. Maybe that's why he's avoiding using that except in this summary. Okay, visibility of system status. That means we should know what's going on with the system we're using. And you notice this is talking about like digital interactive systems primarily. And yet, as I hope you will believe by the end of this, it is a set of principles that we can apply to many more types of things than like an app or a game. This was in 1994, so apps weren't a thing yet. But sort of, I mean, there were things that were interactive. So but it's something that I'm convinced you can apply to anything. So let's see how it goes. So the visibility of the system status, like is it on, is it working? You need to give the user feedback about if it's on, if it's working, what it's doing at the time. Okay, matching between the system and the real world. So speak the user's language rather than creating a language for them to learn. If you create a language that the user has to learn, it increases their cognitive load. They have to think about it, they have to remember it. This is always the challenge to me when I start playing a new video game. There's always something to learn. There's always something to remember about certain terminology or certain interface conventions that are being used, and if it's designed well, there's a little bit less of that. But if there's just a lot in their system, even a well-designed system can require a lot of learning before you can really even play it. As much as possible, if you match things that users expect or users have seen before in their own life, then they're going to adapt to it much more easily. User control and freedom. This is kind of the undo option. Give them an option to undo. So make sure, give them the ability to opt in, opt out. Give them the ability to move in a way that they feel they have control over. And this is one in the example that I show you is actually, well, this one and number one actually are going to be both things that get a little bit tricky when you're talking about fiction, but I'll show you what I mean. But in general, you want to make sure users have the ability to control their experience of it, right? And you'll see it, okay. Consistency and standards. Don't switch up terminology, don't switch up button styles. If you have multiple buttons, make sure they look similar to each other. If you have multiple links, make sure the links are all the same color as each other. This is just basic design. This is something that you probably do intuitively, or the platform you're using might even enforce this kind of consistency. But regardless of where it comes from, it's important. So if you have choices, make sure you're choosing towards consistency and standardization as opposed to divergence and idiosyncrasy. Okay, so error prevention. Make sure your thing works. And this is, again, kind of common sense, but if you have errors, it's going to slow your user down. If you can prevent them, you're going to be better off, right? I think that's common sense, but it's worth saying out loud. Recognition rather than recall. I think this one's a little harder to understand. As you can see from my visited link color, I clicked on the video here to watch it. And the example was, think of two different ways of asking the user something. Version number one asks, who is the author of Moby Dick? So to answer that question, you will have to kind of go into your memory and load up Moby Dick, and hopefully you rummage around in there and eventually you come across the answer, right? So you have to pull that entire answer out of your mind. So think of another version of that question. Is Herman Melville the author of Moby Dick? So I could pose that to you and you might answer that. I mean, hopefully, or you might even be able to Google it, but hopefully you recognize that. Hopefully, like when I asked the question, who's the author of Moby Dick, maybe you're like, it's one of those older 19th century guys, what's his name? But if I said Herman Melville, is Herman Melville the author of Moby Dick, you probably say, oh yeah, that's it. And you just recognize that as something that you already knew, as opposed to having to pull that out. So all you had to pull out of your memory was the recognition, the thumbs up, the yes, this is that, as opposed to Herman Melville, like all the syllables and letters of his name. So that's in general, recognition is better than recall, right? So this kind of goes back to the point about matching the system in the real world. If you can give the user something that they're already familiar with or that they've seen before, then they will adapt to it better, more easily. Okay, so flexibility and efficiency of use. As much as possible, keep things smooth. And again, this is something that you kind of want to this is talking about streamlining. It's talking about taking away complex options from the first time users. And as you get more advanced, you can increase more options perhaps. In a web kind of context, you might think of this as starting with the most important information and then adding secondary information or supporting information or documentation elsewhere within the document. Think about how a Wikipedia page is structured. So you'll have the big takeaway in the first paragraph, you'll have explanation throughout it, and then at the bottom you have links, further resources and categories, other things down there, which are there for the more experienced user, the person who's going a little deeper. But that's not everybody. And so you want to make sure you meet that novice user first, the user that has the least amount of time first, and then you kind of add more for the more dedicated user. So that's what I'm talking about. Aesthetics and minimalist design, as it says here, every extra unit of information competes with the relevant units of information. So know what's relevant, get to that first, and then stop in some cases. All right, again, these are heuristics. These aren't rules, but everything extra should probably not be there, right? Everything extra that's extraneous, if it's superfluous, these are words that we're using to say that they don't belong, and so keep it minimalist. right? So minimalism isn't just an ideology or an aesthetic, it's useful. The less you have, the better in many cases. Okay, so when errors do happen, make sure that the error explains the problem and constructively suggest a solution. If you recall when I was talking about Python, one of the things I really like about Python is that most of the time the Python interpreter gives you a pretty reasonable, or pretty thorough anyway, explanation of what it thinks went wrong. Sometimes that doesn't make sense, but at least it's trying. I find JavaScript really frustrating because it just doesn't. It just is like blep, and it just doesn't work. So that can be a challenge when you're learning JavaScript. But those are systems too. Even though we think of them as languages, those are systems for interpreting and interpreting language and then applying the instructions to some solution. And yeah, some of them are better than others. And then finally, help and documentation. So for the user that just ultimately can't use your product or get stuck or something like that, how do they get help? Like, what do they do next? In your case, it might be a contact me kind of thing, or it might be a an explanation built into your web page. Maybe a user guide, maybe an FAQ page, something like that, right? So again, you have to think about these in different ways, but I think you will find that all of these will be applicable at some level to whatever you're producing for your product, for your big project. So yeah, I'm going to work through a couple examples. But before I do you have any questions? And while I'm asking that, do you have, let me remind you, don't forget your progress report is due today. Your first progress report is due today. Your second one's due next Monday. First progress report you should submit in Canvas, obviously, but also share it with your squad in Discord. And as you share it, don't forget to say, hey, here's my progress report. Don't just sort of paste a link, but actually explain what it is, and then you can chat with each other and interact with that and say, hey, good job, or hey, what about this? And that's the kind of thing that you're there to do as a squad. So make sure you support each other. Thank each other for sharing, or congratulate each other on success, or offer suggestions if people have run into something yet. Also on those progress reports, these first ones, I in my feedback videos on the proposals, in many cases I asked for something specific on the progress report, so I'm going to look for those things. It might have been further research, it might have been a better explanation of some part of it. So make sure you've included that in the progress report. If you forgot that, you need to add it, please add it before I have a chance to look at it, which I will probably start doing tomorrow. So maybe tonight. I'm not going to do full-fledged feedback videos on those, on all of them, maybe on a couple if it's necessary, but mostly I'm going to give just thumbs up or text comments on those. Or if I see, but mainly I'm going to comment or record a video if I see an issue that you need to address. So yeah, so keep an eye out for that. Also keep an eye out, some more people have submitted their proposals that were coming in a little bit late, which is, it's fine with me, but it's getting, we're getting on in the semester. So hopefully people that are still working are getting close to being done. So double check in Canvas and see if you may have some more peer reviews to do. Some people that have finished recently may have, may still be waiting for your peer review, so make sure you double check on that. Okay, sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, so what do you think? Do you have any questions about how this might apply to your project? I think in some cases it'll be pretty obvious. Like if you're designing an app, you probably have to take care of all 10 of these things on your own. If you're designing a video, then many of these things, or like you're producing a video, many of these things will be taken care of just by virtue of whichever platform you share it on. So YouTube, for example. If you're making something in Twine, as many of you are, you will have kind of a blend. You'll have some things that will be handled automatically, like consistency of design, like in terms of the background color and the text font and the font color and all that kind of stuff. But you still have to design many of the other structures and features that you see here. And I think, well, let's try an example and see how that goes. I'm going to give you an example that is not like anything any of you are making, and I think that's why hopefully it's useful as a way to work through all these. And let me see, I'm going to switch on something here, and we're going to take a look at it together. So here we go. Okay, so there's a bit of a lag on this camera, and also it's kind of dark, and also the glare is hitting right on that. Is there any way I can, oh man, okay, maybe I could put that's not too distracting, is it? I don't know. The sun is really hitting that harder than it was when I was first testing this out. So let me take a look at this a little bit bigger here. You don't need to see my hand, but this is a book. This is Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. And so my challenge now is to see if I can explain how each of these 10 heuristics are being demonstrated in this book. I want OBS, there we go. OBS sometimes doesn't let me select the thing I want to select. So I have it here as an artifact to study, but I would appreciate your suggestions as I work through this. So if I see one, I haven't done this ahead of time. This is me on the fly seeing if this makes sense. And so if you have any suggestions, please let me know, because you might be able to think of this in a different way than I can. And that's kind of the point of this exercise, is that you're forced to think of your items, your artifacts in different media through a lens you haven't yet before. So principle number one, heuristic number one, visibility of system status. The system should always keep users informed about what is going on through appropriate feedback within a reasonable time. Okay, this is a book. So what is the status of this book? Right? So that's sort of a rhetorical question, but if you have an answer, then please jump in. So let me see. Let me pull up the live stream on my other window so I can see it. I have too many windows up. So, okay. So visibility of the status. This book is currently closed. That's the status of this book. That's what we're looking for here, is status, and the status is closed. As I was reading, if I were to read this book, this is a book called Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. All right, so right now, let me just flip to a point. This book is on page, as you can see there, 26 and 27. So the status is very visible. It is the page number. The page number tells me how far along am I in this book. And my own sense of time tells me how long I've been reading and lets me estimate how much time I have left to go. The book is, as I say here, it's open, so it's operational right now and interactive. And I can also close it, and it's stored away for later retrieval. But its status is always very easy to figure out. Its material is a physical object, and so that's the case. However, it's not just a physical object, it's an indexical object, meaning I can access specific parts of it referencing the page number as an index. And so I can share my status with someone else, and I can say, hey, check out page 43, and they can check out page 43, and then we are on the same page. Our status with respect to the system is the same, and that's available because it's been made visible by printing that page number on the bottom. It's a trivial thing that's so endemic to reading a book, we don't think about it as a kind of system, but what I'm thinking of as these principles, and it's forcing us to think of the book as an interactive medium, and I think it's working so far. Let's see how it goes. So number two, match between system and the real world. Okay, so this one's going to be trickier, except in the sense that this is a book in the real world. Maybe that's where we have to be a little bit stretchy with it. And yeah, I don't really see any way to do that, because our main content here is main content is letters and numbers, and those are abstractions. There's no such thing as a 1 in the real world, a 5 in the real world. These are abstract conceptions that we use to reference an idea that we can use consistently, but there's no physical correspondence to a letter. We can write them, of course, but we are copying down an abstract idea when we do that. These are things that don't exist in the real world, independently of humans using them as constructs of language. So I think that one's a little trickier. That said, there are some books. I don't know if I have any. I might have some examples over here. Oh yeah, hang on a second. This is a book about books, and let's see if I can find a good example. Oh yeah, this kind of works. So I don't know if you can see this, but this is a book about artist books, and this is a image of an artist book called A Humument by Tom Phillips. And in his books, in a humument, it is very much a book about books, and so the physical structure of the page becomes the referent, it becomes the image, and that's a sense in which there is kind of a real world echo. This is getting pretty abstract, and I didn't really intend it to, but there's as a book by Max Ernst, who's got physical structures. But yeah, so I'm talking about things like concrete poetry or sculptural books, and these are kind of the exceptions to the rule in terms of books. So I don't think that there is a very clear number 2 for books most of the time. Sometimes there might be. Okay, user control and freedom. Clearly marked emergency exit. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear. You just, I'm done. I don't want to read anymore. Notice the lag, by the way, between the sound and the landing. I can't really do anything about that. But the book has complete control and freedom. We are totally free to leave it. We can come and go. We can go forward and backward in this book, and no problem, right? Totally intuitive, makes sense. All right, consistency and standards. Well, I mean, one very basic standard is, of course, that it's using the same letters of the alphabet over and over again. That is a kind of consistency. It's using the same typeface, but also other things, right? Like, oh, I just broke the spine. I didn't mean to do that. That's okay. It's cheap paperback. The amount of letters per page, the position of the page numbers on each page, other typographical conventions. These are being used consistently in relation to established standards. And I was just thinking, actually, going back to number 2, there is kind of a real-world conventionality to this. So the idea of a book is many things. It's a genre, in this case, a novel. And so we have a sense of what novels are from our real world. And so when we read this, we don't, we're not super confused by all these things on here. It's a helicopter. There's been several helicopters going over today. I don't know why. I'll wait for it to pass. I don't know if you can pick it up on the mic, but it's pretty loud. Yeah, it's already gone. Yeah, it's been, I don't know why. I mean, we're sort of in one of the flight paths to Quantico if people are coming in and out of Quantico, but it's not always that case. Anyway, so consistency and standards. Error prevention. Obviously there's no error message popping up here whenever you get to a certain page. That doesn't really make sense, but certainly there could be printing errors, and there are certainly books with printing errors that I have. I don't have any with me here, but I certainly have had several, and they're pretty interesting sometimes. In fact, there's a whole blog that records those, and it's pretty cool. But anyway, error prevention doesn't really matter. Recognition rather than recall. This is a book with a fair number of characters, but not as many. And so whenever possible, this is reusing the same characters' names, and so we have them over and over again. If you think of some works are more complicated. My wife was reading a Shakespeare play recently, I think it was King John, and she was having a hard time because, like, reading it with the kids, and they were having a hard time because many characters go by several different names, and so it becomes you have to recall which person goes by that name, and that increases the cognitive load of that play, and so it becomes hard to follow if you're just reading it. I imagine if it's acted out, it's much easier to tell who's who, but if you're just reading it, you have to construct all that in your mind, and then you have to keep track of multiple things, and it's just too much cognitive load. So for them, it wasn't. They decided to stop reading it. So wherever possible, we want to recall, let our users recall something as opposed to let our users recognize something as opposed to asking them to recall something. And that's something that you see in good fiction writing too. So it's an aspect both of the platform, the book, and of the content, the writer. Okay, flexibility and efficiency of use. I mean, you could do multiple things with this book, right? Like you could kind of make art out of it, I guess. You could use it as a prop to hold up another book. It could be available if you just need a quote from Verne. It doesn't matter what. You could flip to a random page, and you could say, "I was far more willing to allow that this chimney of an extinct volcano was covered by lava of a kind refractory to heat, in fact a bad conductor, which did not allow the great increase of temperature to percolate through its sides. The hot water jet supported my view of the matter." So here, so it supported that use of it, which was to find a random quote. Not an amazing quote, but I got it. But it also supports more detailed uses like reading thoroughly, reading quickly, close reading, writing a paper on it, adapting it into a screenplay to film with. So it definitely supports multiple uses. Okay, then aesthetics and minimalist design. I mean, it really is just letters on a page. So in terms of things you need to recognize as design elements, it is pretty minimal. So we have chapter numbers, chapter headings, and then text, page number. That's pretty much it. It's really just those 4 or 5 design signifiers within it. And so it is a fairly minimalist design in that sense. Yep. Help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. And then that's not likely to be the case. We're not going to get error messages from this probably. But then help and documentation. There is often a help guide to books that are unusual. This book is not very unusual. This is a pretty straightforward book, but there are certainly study guides and other things that you might find useful as well. Okay, so Siobhan has a question. Let's take a look at the assignment here. So if you look at the instructions, Siobhan, this is, well, let me do that and show you. So step 1, choose an artifact to analyze. This should be the same kind of thing that you're creating in your big project, but not the thing that you were creating in your big project because you haven't created that yet. So you're choosing an artifact to analyze something like what you're creating, but not what you're creating because you haven't created it yet. Okay, and then you fill that in here, and that's why I'm asking you explain what are you analyzing and who are you, and then fill it in here. Okay, hopefully that made sense, Siobhan. So if you have more questions, let me know, but let's take a look at how I would fill out this usability worksheet for this book. I'm not going to go through it now because this is the one you're going to copy, but I'll talk through it a little bit. In terms of these two columns, what I'm interested in is keeping track of which of these things is automatically handled by the platform and which of these things is going to be something that the creator had to do on purpose intentionally. So visibility of the system status, you know, let me just make a copy of this and then I can fill it in as I go. Just entering Siobhan in here. Sorry for the typo there, but hopefully you see what I mean. So this is my copy. This is not the one you'll see. Visibility of system status, page numbers, system in the real world. It is I think the genre, it is written in a genre that already exists. That's something that Jules Verne chose to do. You might say he was helping create the science fiction genre, but we don't have to get too close into analysis there. That was just an example. User control and freedom, yeah. Pick it up, put it down, and that's something that's inherent to the platform of the book because Jules Verne didn't decide he wants to make something that, like, it wasn't his choice. Like, he wanted to make a book, and that's something that's automatically inherited by every book. It has this ability. You can pick it up, you can put it down. And so consistency and standards, yeah, typography, page design. The creator could have chosen to do something different in this case, but he didn't. And this is just a very straightforward book. It has typical typography and page design. So the thing I want you to avoid as you fill out this spreadsheet is don't do this. Don't say in A. Or not applicable, because I want you to think creatively in some cases maybe about how the artifact that you're studying has some way of addressing each of these. And if you're talking about a digital artifact, certainly there will be error prevention, certainly there will be errors or some kind of error handling. So make sure you think about it. If it's not something you've ever encountered, that could be just a fact that error prevention is something that's already been implemented really well, but you should note that. Like, you should say, I've never seen an error here. But if you're thinking about like putting a video on YouTube, you've probably seen YouTube errors like a broken link or like we're having difficulty playing this content, try again later, those kind of messages. So where did this come from and what happens there, right? That means that something broke down, but you know what should have happened instead? Like, what could they have done to design the system so that error would be unnecessary? I don't know. We might have to speculate on that a little bit, or even do a little research. So, okay. So hopefully this makes sense. You know, try it out. We'll have time to talk about it on Wednesday. So send me questions if you have any. But I hope it's pretty straightforward. Just pick an artifact and fill out this worksheet with it, and then that's to turn it in by Friday. So just submit the URL, like you know how you can share a URL. Just share the URL to your worksheet on this page here in Canvas. Then this is step 3. I want you to think about what you've documented, and since you're documenting something that is like what you are going to be creating, pay special attention to this column, the things that you recognize as being the responsibility of a creator, and talk about how you're going to make sure you do those things, or do those things better, or whatever you need to do. And add that's for your your second progress report, which is next Monday. Make sure you tell me about how all the things you're going to do as the creator. Okay, so hopefully that's making sense. I don't see any more questions or anyone typing in Discord, so I'm going to move on to another example just for the last few minutes here and take a look at a different kind of book, a book that does some things differently using essentially the same platform. It's a bound book, the codex form, and yet this is somewhat different. Turn on my dot cam. This is a choose your own adventure book called The Abominable Snowman. This is by R.A. Montgomery, and this is a choose your own adventure book. This is the brand Choose Your Own Adventure. There were other game book brands. The Time Machine series was one. Goosebumps did a line of similar books with the same premise. I believe Choose Your Own Adventure ended up either patenting or copyrighting their method. It was recently litigated, actually, and I can't remember why it came up recently. Oh, I want to say, don't quote me on this because I'm guessing, but you might have seen the episode of Black Mirror, Bandersnatch, which has a choose your own adventure kind of format where you make choices as you're watching the episode, and I believe the company that owns the Choose Your Own Adventure brand was trying to sue them for intellectual property. Like that concept of choosing your own path was Choose Your Own Adventure's intellectual property. Although I don't buy that. I don't think that's a valid argument. So maybe it was something else. Anyway, so let's take a look. This is a book, and in many ways it has a lot of the same usability analysis that I would have applied to Journey to the Center of the Earth. It has pages, it has text in it. You read the text and you understand what page you're on by looking at the page number. In this case, it's at the top right. However, the main difference is, as you can see at the bottom, you have to make some choices, and then based on those choices, you click on a link. I don't know why I'm out of focus. That was weird. I went out of focus as this one came into focus. I don't know what's happening with my cameras today. But let's take a look at let me go back to the heuristics, and I'll keep them up here. And for number one, the visibility of the system status is something that is in many ways hidden from you in this book. And that's on purpose, and we can decide whether we like it or not as users, but it is something that we're not sure about sometimes. That is, we're not sure whether a choice we've made is a good one or a bad one, and that's the fun of reading it. We want to see what happens. If it told us what was going to happen here, or if it was obvious, then we wouldn't bother reading it. So we want to see what happens. And notice how this is abstracting above the level of page sequence and into the level of plot. So now we're thinking about this as a story, and the story is the system, not the book anymore. I wanted to show you this particular choice because I think it's a good example of kind of how to give your users a bad set of choices. Sorry, I can't. I'll just read it, I guess. Hopefully it's not too hard to look at. Yeah, I can't focus. This camera doesn't have a focus button. It tries to autofocus, but it's clearly not trying very hard. So in this case, you're following your friend up into the Himalayan mountains. You're after Yeti, of course. So you're with someone named Runal right now, and you come across. Well, I'll read it. So the trail suddenly becomes very steep, and one side falls off more than 1,000 meters to a river gorge. You come to a small stone house with a thatched roof. An old woman sits in the sunlight by the door. Can you tell us if any climbers came by here? My friend is about 5'9", medium build, has dark hair. Runal translates your description into Nepali. We're looking for our friend Carlos. The woman nods and says 2 men came by. The younger one left a note. The note says, "Don't follow. Wait at base camp. Carlos." Runal turns to you with a puzzled look on his face. Carlos is your friend. If it were up to me, I would ignore his message, but you know him better. What now? What do you think? So we have 2 choices. We can either obey the message and climb back up to the base camp to wait for Carlos. If so, we can turn to page 20. or we can ignore the message and decide to look for Carlos. So what should we do? It's up to you. Actually, it's not really, because I need to move through this to get us done in time. But if you have a strong feeling about either way, voice it now. Do we obey the message, or do we go hunting for Carlos on our own? Obey the message. Okay. Well, that's the right choice, but it's actually not the choice that I want to make right now. So, thanks, Samantha. But let's ignore the message and look for Carlos. Now we don't. I put a check mark there so I would know. Okay, Carlos may be in trouble. We must find him. Runal nods in agreement. Gives the woman 2 copper coins. Blah blah blah. The woman claims that your friend was traveling with a Yeti. You stare at Runal in disbelief, but why not? You are here to find them. Maybe they found you this time. You head down the trail not knowing quite what to expect. So this, we don't have a choice. We can turn to page 32. And notice, like, as you're flipping to essentially random pages, you have no idea how much of the book you have left until you get to a page like this. So as you race down the path, you see footprints that might have been left by a Yeti. Suddenly it is very quiet. The birds have stopped singing. The only sound you hear is your footsteps, and Runal is right behind you. You wonder why. It doesn't take long to find out. Around a turn of the path, you run smack into a band of creatures that can only be Yeti. They are aiming an ancient bronze cannon at you. One of them touches a light to the fuse, and that is the last thing you remember. Until you wake up in your own bed. It must have been that awesome triple-decker with mustard, anchovies, and chocolate syrup. So, it was a dream. Right? But that's not the only ending. This book tells us there are 28 possible endings, and in that one it's a dream. But in many others, it's not a dream, and sometimes you go on to live the rest of your life among the Yeti, and in many other cases, you face a different end. Okay, so this is a similarly bad choice, actually, on the same page. So basically, it's saying here, like, there's a bunch of Yeti, but it's pretty dangerous. Maybe we should go to check out the tigers instead. And so if you can either go ahead with the expedition to follow the Yeti, or you can decide to postpone the expedition to let the Yeti calm down and go on to the Terai region in search of tigers. So let's see what happens if we search for tigers, which Runal has just told us will be safer. All right, so something's happening, blah, blah, blah. There's a bunch of guys jump out and chase you, and then, oh yeah, I think they're poachers. And then, not good, must be poachers after tiger skins and elephant tusks, dangerous, says your guide. Let's follow them, let's see what they're up to. Okay, but maybe we should split up, that way we can cover more territory. All right, so should we split up or should we stay together? If we want to split up, we can turn to page 28. If we want to stay together, we can turn to page 29. Let's do the horror movie thing, and let's choose to split up. So we'll turn to page 28, and just kidding, we died. And so also, this is also what happens if we stay together. So both pages happen to be next to each other, recto and verso here, and in both of them we're killed by the poachers. So it's an example of a false choice. So we as the user might feel kind of ripped off by that. And that's often many people's take on these books. Now, that said, I mean, this writer tried to come up with 28 different endings, and not all of them can be winners, right? You got to do your best. But many of them like that, they feel like the feeling is that the choice you made did not lead inevitably to that result. It was something where that result was what they wanted, and then they sort of contrived a series of choices that led you there. They wanted about half of the endings to be bad, about half of the endings are good, and then the remaining 3 or 4 are really good. And so you can look at these books at a design level and see them that way. When you're designing an interactive experience and you give your users choices, this is my last bit of advice and then I'll wrap up the stream. Make sure that their choices are meaningful. Make sure that you convince the reader that the choices that they've made are the kinds of choices they would make in that situation, and that they encounter reasonable consequences to those choices in those experiences. This is kind of the rule of thumb for interactive design. If you're designing a story, make sure that your choices are reasonable ones, right? And that's often the case. Like you see within this, even calling this interactive is a bit of a stretch, except in the sense that all books are interactive. There are many situations where it says, do you want to do this or this? But really, it would occur to most of us to do something else entirely. So make sure that when you're giving your user choices, make sure that they are choices that they would make, or that your user understands why the choices are constrained. And I showed many of you the example in Depression Quest where there often were good options, but you couldn't choose them. And so that constraint or that inability to choose was part of the mechanic that Zoe Quinn was trying to teach with. So that's something you can do, but you have to be really artful about it and upfront about how that works. So if you want to choose any kind of, I guess, anti-mechanic like that, make sure you know why you're doing it, and make sure you test it. Make sure it actually makes sense, right? Okay, so those are several thoughts. The main thing, we'll do something in person, interactive in person on Wednesday, and then I'll design a parallel thing for anyone online on Wednesday, likewise for Friday. But complete this worksheet by Friday on some artifact like the one that you are creating for the big project. If you're not sure how to find one of those or whether the thing you found is a good enough comparison, then let me know and I can help, but it should be pretty straightforward, I hope. Like a website, if you're making a website, a podcast if you're making a podcast, a YouTube video if you're making a video, or a Vimeo video, like whatever. Make sure that you can find something and then talk about it. All right, and remember, no NAs. Everything here could be applicable, so make sure you think about that. Okay, great. So I'm going to wrap it up here for the Section 1 stream. I will be starting again in about 15 minutes for Section 2. So maybe I'll see you Wednesday or Friday or in the spring, or who knows. Okay, I'll wrap it up here though. Thanks for watching. Hope you're all doing well, and if you haven't voted yet, don't forget to vote tomorrow. Okay, bye.